um, is in climate science and spent 6 years as a middle school classroom teacher and eighth grade science teacher before kind of finding my way into this space. Um, without further ado, welcome. I believe I am. I think I just pressed record, so we're recording. It's all good here. And thanks for being here for the third of a five-part data puzzle webinar series. Um, we've got, I don't know how many folks are here, small crowd, so feel free to, about 10 people, feel free to ask questions as they might come up for you. We can pause, dive into some of the science or some of the pedagogical practices or strategies, whatever would be most beneficial for you. But really, we're going to dive in, engage with this wildfire, drought, and future of forest data puzzle so that you have an opportunity to engage with the data puzzle instructional framework and see how it works in the context of this lesson. So um, those that maybe haven't heard of data puzzles are middle high school lessons. Oh my gosh, I forgot to put the landing page in the chat. I love it. People are people are on it, keeping me. This is
Hey, John, I tried
yeah.
to get on the landing page this morning and the link was broke. Like if I go to your data puzzles page and then click on the wildfires, it would just tell me that I wasn't available.
Okay. How about now? So I just put this let me get out of here. I just put this into the chat. Are you all able to access this document here? I see some anonymous Oryx in there. What has happened? We're doing some maintenance on the website, and if I copy a link when I'm logged in and it says admin, others aren't allowed to join this. So I'm willy-nilly copying links and adding them places, and if it has admin in that URL, folks aren't able to join that. So yeah, hopefully you're all able to access this and some of the resources here. While we're here, we might as well dive in. Data puzzles, middle high school lessons that combine classroom-friendly data sets with research-backed and instructional practices of ambitious science teaching to support students in making sense of phenomena. And so this resource is one of about 12 that explore different science phenomena. That could be Arctic amplification. Why is the Arctic warming more rapidly than the rest of the world? What's causing the mega drought in the Western United States? Or in this context, we're exploring shifting patterns of post-fire succession in a warmer, drier world. So uh, they all follow this same instructional framework, which we'll talk about here in a moment. And all of these pages look the same. There's some background information. Events will be included here. This is this webinar. And then they're connected to next generation science standards. And all of the materials are here. Everything's as a Google product, Google Docs, Google Slides. And the reason for that is so that you can make a copy of the resource and modify it as you see fit. I try to make it plug and play. Everything's written so that it could be ready to go, but we all know that as teachers, we modify resources to fit our style or meet the needs of our students, likely both. So this gives you that flexibility. I'll open a teacher guide here. This says draft on it. This has a big draft watermark because our resources are classroom tested and reviewed by scientists. This resource has not been classroom tested yet. And so until it has a draft watermark, once it's been classroom tested and I've received feedback and gone and incorporated that feedback, then I will remove that draft watermark. All the teacher guides look the same, some background information. We'll talk about the 4 parts of a data puzzle, but these parts are briefly described and an estimate about how long they would take is included. Page 2 of all the teacher guides look the same. Connections to next generation science standards, as well as the material, slide deck, student worksheet, answer key. The answer keys are buried in the teacher guide, so hopefully they're not as easy for students to find, but make sure that you look at those. I think that those are a really helpful resource for teachers before diving in. And then each of the four parts of a data puzzle is described, I hope succinctly. I know that it's not fun to get handed a 20-page teacher guide, so 4 or 5 pages max is the length of each of these teacher guides. So again, we're diving into this Wildfire, Drought, and Future of Forest teacher guide. But we've got about 12 other resources. Slide decks are meant to be used in conjunction with the student worksheet. So they are back and forth. You go through the slide deck and it might be like, all right, dive into the student worksheet here. So use those in tandem. And all of the student worksheets look the same. The first 2 pages, interactive text with some video links, a game in this one that I'll talk about, and then some other important information, and then questions that go with the text. Students make predictions about a question before analyzing some data. There are some questions to support that data analysis, and then they always end with the construction of a final model. So again, lots of scaffolding here, questions and discussions meant to happen throughout. This is not a resource that should be just distributed to students and they should be told and say, go. That's not what this is. They're best used in a really collaborative way where students are learning with and from one another. So we'll go back to this slide deck. Any questions so far? Great. So I briefly introduced myself, former climate scientist, middle school classroom teacher. Now I'm kind of doing the best of both worlds. I have a foot in both worlds now, working with scientists to bring their research into classrooms. This work, data puzzles, has been really so I've been encouraged, supported by my supervisor, Dr. Anna Gold, to pursue this. And so her help and vision has made this possible. My colleague Elise is instrumental in finding these data sets and bouncing ideas off of her. And Amy is a graphic designer that we're very fortunate to have on our team. And I think her polish makes these resources feel really professional. So acknowledge her. Dr. Melissa Bratton, it's kind of an idol of mine. This was the textbook, the author of a textbook I had to read and was fortunate to read and work through in school before I got my teaching license. And now I get to work with her at the University of Colorado Boulder and develop this data puzzles framework with her. You'll see that the ambitious science teaching structure that she helped develop, we've modified a little bit with her permission and her co-authors' permissions. And so really amazing to get to work and learn with her. And then all the teachers and scientists whose ideas and knowledge has benefited this work. The history of this, we started in 2019. That's actually when I started at Ceres, trying to connect classrooms to an Arctic expedition, the Mosaic Arctic expedition, one of the biggest Arctic expeditions ever conducted to study the changing Arctic climate system. And we developed quite a following. And after the field portion of the expedition ended, teachers were reaching out, wanting to continue to engage with Arctic data, Mosaic data, other data sets as well. And so we reached out to our friends at Data Nuggets to bring some of these data sets to the public by developing a data nugget. But we wanted a little bit more freedom in terms of how we were presenting the data and the types of questions we were asking and the instructional practices that were being used. And so that's where we recruited Melissa to kind of join us and help us envision what that framework could look like. And so data puzzles, again, combining these data sets that we're fortunate to have access to. We have 800 scientists that we work with, and so lots of data. And so work with those scientists to curate data sets, work with these educational researchers who've identified these best practices and combining those two into data puzzles. If you're not familiar with data puzzles, it's a pedagogical framework with practices, tools to support meaningful and equitable science education. Here are the 4 parts of data puzzles. Planning for engaging with important science ideas. You can think about these as like the disciplinary core ideas of NGSS. How do we bring out student ideas? These are student experiences, their language, among their ideas, these resources that can be leveraged to support students in making sense of new phenomena. How do we work with science ideas to support their ongoing changes in thinking, and then bringing all of these 3 pieces of the pie to get together, challenging students to reflect on what they've learned, how their thinking has changed to construct evidence-based explanations. So the 4 parts of ambitious science teaching, we've infused those into this polished product, swapping the identifying important science ideas and eliciting students' ideas quadrants. So rather than teachers doing the planning for how to deal with or integrate the important science ideas, we've already done that work. So instead, data puzzles always start with this eliciting of students' ideas, bringing out student resources that to the classroom in the context of an opening scenario. And so the opening scenario includes science concepts in a context that students might be familiar with. And so we reveal what students know about these science concepts before students explore these same science concepts in a different setting, a setting that they're maybe not familiar with. Part 2, this is that student worksheet that you saw earlier. That's where we distribute the student worksheet. Students would engage with that interactive text, and we, the facilitator, are working to connect student resources elicited in this first part to the new scenario, this science investigation being conducted by a featured scientist. Students in part 2 here, identifying important science ideas, they construct initial models and make predictions about an investigative question that's embedded in the text, and then they test that prediction against an authentic, curated data set in this third part here, supporting ongoing changes in thinking. Constructing evidence-based explanation. This is, again, we're challenging students to reflect on what they've learned and finalize their ideas as they relate to this investigative question by constructing a final model. So these are the 4 parts of data puzzles. They're, of course, included in each of the 12-ish resources that we've had. And so today, what we're going to do is engage with these 4 parts in the context of the wildfire, drought, and future of forest data puzzles. I should note that some of these data puzzles, what I found was that I have these longer units, these storyline units following a model-based inquiry instructional framework. And in those longer units, I have some data sets that I think are really compelling in these 7, 8, 9, 10 lesson long units. And so sometimes they get buried. So I've pulled some of these data sets out to produce these more concise, maybe 2-3 day lessons that are these data puzzles. So the data set that we'll see today is a part of a larger unit. And if you're interested in learning a little bit more about that larger unit, I'm happy to talk about it at the end, but I just wanted to flag that. So the data set we'll talk about again was part of a larger unit, but I've pulled it out and put it in this more concise package because I think it is a really compelling story. And I want to make sure people know about it if they're interested. We'll skip this part. You've already seen the teacher guide, student worksheet, slide deck. So again, all of this is meant to be plug and play should you choose to use it that way. But again, everything is a Google product. So you can make a copy of that and modify it as you see fit, or you can take whatever you'd like from this. If there are certain parts that you like, right there, that's what we're all gonna do. I just wanna put that out there. All data puzzles begin again with this eliciting students' ideas practice. And the goal of this part is to elicit student ideas about an opening scenario that may be images, a video, a demo, or just a prompt that's going to have similarities to the science investigation presented in the data puzzle, that puzzle plot, the interactive text that we saw in the student worksheet. So here the teacher, the facilitator is listening as students share their experiences, their ideas, their language, and they're listening for things that they maybe can use as resources to help the students make sense of complex new science phenomena when they're reading and engaging with that data puzzle text. Teachers have used this as a warm-up prompt. Think, pair, share. I've seen teachers use small whiteboards. This opening scenario, this part one is not included in the student worksheet. So this is something, the first 3, 4, 5 slides of the slide deck, there's some prompt, some image, some video with a question that students are going to answer again, either in their notebook or in a small discussion, a whole class discussion. And then we're going to segue from this opening scenario into, okay, let's go learn a little bit more about this person or this science idea in this puzzle plot text. So it's meant to here's something that you're maybe familiar with or have heard about before. What do you know already about this? Have you experienced this? To, okay, this person studied something similar in a different context. In this data puzzle, the opening scenario is for students to consider wildfires as an important part of ecosystems, a natural part of ecosystems, and challenging students to imagine if they were walking going on a hike and they're in a forest and they come through a burn area, what do they think that burn area would look like in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years? Do you think this burn area will look the same? Do you think it will look different? If it looks different, how so? What I've found is that middle high school students have, some of them already maybe have been exposed to patterns of succession in their previous schooling. And so I want to hear what students already know or maybe think they know about succession. We're not using that word yet. We're just looking at a burned landscape. Is it going to look this way in the future, or how might it look different? What will students come up with? After facilitating a small, large group discussion, perhaps even taking note of student experiences, language ideas on butcher paper or a whiteboard, asking students to consider what factors. I assume that students will talk about things growing back, but I want students then to consider what factors might control whether or not a forest comes back or trees grow back. Here I'm looking for students to think about seeds, water, maybe soil, some of these different factors that might impact whether a wildfire comes back. Again, water is going to be a critical part of the story here. So really get an opportunity to hear what students think and then start to plant some seeds yourself. Asking students to consider if it matters if the forest grows back or not. What do they think about that? So I've got some pictures of tiny seedlings here, young, small trees growing back after a fire. This is taken in 2021 after the East Troublesome Fire in Rocky Mountain National Park. So again, what do we already know about succession is really the purpose of slide one. What factors might impact whether trees come back after a fire? And then we introduce the featured scientist of this data puzzle, Dr. Camille Stevens-Rubin, who studies how a changing climate might impact the ability of a forest to recover after a fire. So again, we're going from what do you know, what have you heard, what have you seen, to, oh, here's somebody who studies this. And Dr. Stevens-Rubin has led a research team who's visited over almost 1,500 burn sites from areas that have burned between 1985 and 2015. And at each of these sites, she's evaluating how these burn areas are recovering. Are we seeing trees come back? Are they the same trees? Are they different trees? Are there no trees coming back? And how might climate conditions play a role in that? So after that opening scenario, right? You can see student experience, segue into this featured scientist. Let's go learn a little bit more about this featured scientist in that interactive reading. And that's interactive reading we call the puzzle plot. That makes up the bulk of part 2, identifying important science ideas. So this is when we would distribute the worksheet to students. Let's learn a little bit more about her work. And we're identifying important science ideas in this puzzle plot text. Working with students to try to connect science ideas from the reading back to the opening scenario. So something familiar, what they've experienced, what they've shared in the opening scenario, to something that's unfamiliar, what's being studied by the featured scientists. Can we summarize these ideas by constructing an annotated sketch or describing what we see in an annotated sketch? This kind of functions as our de facto initial model, and then identify and make a prediction for an investigative question, the question this featured scientist is seeking to answer. I'd say the majority of teachers using data puzzles read the text aloud as a whole class, just because it allows the teacher to facilitate discussions when prompted in the text, or maybe at their discretion. It allows the teacher to press play and watch the video that's embedded in the text as a whole class. And in this particular resource, there is a link to a modified rock, paper, scissors game that you could play with students. So some different ways to interact with the text and conceptualize and even play with the science ideas. Also encourage teachers to, if you already have close reading strategies that you use with students, encourage teachers to use those same close reading strategies to support students in making sense of the text. This is a prompt directly from, or a slide directly from the slide deck. This same model is in all the data puzzles. So a little bit of introduction to the puzzle plot reading and our own really simple close reading strategies, wanting students to circle the investigative question, and then underline similarities that they may identify between the reading and the opening scenario, because they'll be asked to discuss that later. We've kind of looked at the puzzle plot text, a lot of text here, as you can see, and again, opportunity with Google products to simplify, remove, summarize different parts for students as you see fit. The basics here, we're talking about in this first paragraph, really wanting to stress to students that fire is a natural part of ecosystems and beneficial in a lot of ways. And many species have adaptations, have adapted along with fire, to come back quickly and readily after these wildfires. So featuring lodgepole pine, and shown here is a serotinous cone. There is a video here that describes the benefits of wildfire. I think it's a TED Ed video. And then segueing from, okay, plants have adapted to live and thrive with wildfire. They come back in this predictable pattern, we call secondary succession. And so pictured here is that predictable pattern. We've got the wildfire, this kind of barren landscape where we got grasses and flowers coming back, shrubs and seedlings, and returning to that climax community. So establishing this process called secondary succession. Then we kind of we're trying to like show that process, but then present it like it's not as simple as what we see here, especially in a warmer, drier world, where seedlings, these conifer seedlings, are actually having a harder time growing back. And in many cases, they're not growing back. So there isn't a return to this climax community. We're seeing forests transition to grasslands and shrublands after fires. So that's kind of the answer to this data puzzle, and the data that students engage with supports that, of course, but wanting to highlight like we want to introduce this concept, secondary succession. We'll play a game to help students understand this process, but then present data in a real life context that shows that maybe it's not as cut and dry as it's often taught. And in this case, after we introduce this pattern and this process, we talk about how scientists are concerned about whether or not this process might be interfered with because of a changing climate, warmer, drier world. And so Dr. Stevens-Ruman and her team are investigating how climate conditions might impact the recovery of forest fires. And so pictured here are the different areas that they visited, and they visited over almost 1,500 burn sites. And at each site, they're counting the seedlings, the number of small conifer trees that are growing back. The fires took place between 1985 and 2015. And so again, they went out, I don't know, let's say they went out 2010 to 2016, 2017, 2 field years to these different burn sites. But again, these fires took place at different times. And they're looking for seedlings, looking for trees. Did they grow back or not? They also looked at the climate conditions. So the period of time, 1985 to 1999, that was a relatively wet, cold climate conditions in the Northern Rockies during this time frame. And so fires that took place during that time frame, like what does their succession rates look like? Were conifer trees able to grow back during that cool, wet time period? And then they, again, looking at fires that took place between 2000 and 2015, a relatively warm, dry time period, were seedlings able to grow back in those warm, dry conditions after a wildfire? So we're looking at these 2 time periods with different climatic conditions, trying to figure out if seedlings, these small conifer trees, were able to grow back or not. Gonna pause and go back to this page 1, adaptations, succession, and highlight this modified rock, paper, scissors game you could play with students. There's a link in the teacher guide to these instructions, but essentially you'd introduce your students, they get up out of their seats or you go outside, talk about you're in this burned landscape that was just destroyed, and we're gonna play rock, paper, scissors to demonstrate how different vegetation types come back. So pictured here is me in my backyard trying to just demonstrate the game. Everyone would begin as bare ground, kneeling down with their arms out. So the fire has just taken place. We've got bare ground, and they're kneeling, kind of hopping around, trying to find somebody else that's also bare ground. Everybody is at this point. Once they find somebody, they would play rock, paper, scissors, shoot. The winner of that rock, paper, scissors, shoot battle would become grass. And so they would transition, move their hands up like this, waving around, and they would hop around trying to find somebody else who was also grass. Once they find somebody who was grass, they would play rock, paper, scissors themselves. Back to this first one here. If they were bare ground, playing another bare ground. If you lost, you'd stay bare ground. You'd go find another person that was also bare ground. Continue to play until you won, and then you would become grass. Hop around, find somebody who's grass. Once you win that grass versus grass battle, you become a shrub. Here's my dog Oso. You become a shrub, so your hands up, kind of standing up a little taller. You move around as a shrub, find another shrub, play rock, paper, scissors. Winner would become a tree, and you're standing still at that point. So kind of a fun way to model succession in these patterns. You, the teacher, can at any point yell fire again and wipe everybody out, and everyone would become barren ground. So opportunity for this to be played multiple times for you to pause and have discussions, but just a way to demonstrate this process that's not just like visual on the page, but get kids moving around as well. Any questions about this game? Guess I haven't looked at the chat. Cool. Great. So as with all of this, it's optional, but I think this is could be potentially fun. I would like to do this with my eighth graders. Yeah, a little bit of introduce a little chaos into the classroom. This is a slide directly from the slide deck. I just wanted to point this out as after students engage with the text, there's always this type of slide, which is asking students to think about similarities between the opening scenario and what they just read about in the text. So in this context, it's like, think back to your prediction about what you thought this forest that was that was burned would look like in 20 years. Um, how is that similar? Is your prediction similar to this graphic over here? Is that kind of what you were thinking? So just an opportunity to for student self-reflection to think about what they experience, their language, their ideas, and how similar or dissimilar they are to what's being presented in the text. This slide here, after they've had an opportunity to make connections between their individual student resources and what's in the text, students will draw and describe something, record the investigative question, make a prediction. So in this case, I really want to highlight the different climate conditions between 85 and 99 and 2000 and 2015. So I have students draw and describe the different climate conditions, which are written up in that puzzle plot text. Might be useful if students have constructed models in the past to facilitate a discussion about how you could use thermometers or raindrops to show different climate conditions. This is also scaffolding for the final model. So it's basically an opportunity to practice using some of these signs and symbols. Take a look at the answer key here. So in the student worksheet, these are, I think the mountains are here. I have to double check. This is a screenshot of the answer key. The mountains are here, and the key is here, but the mountains are blank. And so we want students to know. I haven't even drawn this yet. I got to go back and do this. I got to draw the climate conditions. So I got what I'm looking for. It's embarrassing. I'm looking for a thermometer, which I have not drawn yet, but will. That's kind of like not very full here, maybe a lot of raindrops. And then I'm looking for a thermometer that's filled all the way to the top and one raindrop. Work in progress. Probably should have looked at this before. Red cheeks. So that's what I'm looking for. We'll see it in the final model, but an opportunity for students to see these different veg types on the mountains here. That's kind of what we'll expect to see at the end. But I want to see thermometers and raindrops up here to represent the different climate conditions. Number two, what the question that Dr. Stevens Rumen I'm going, this is investigating how do climate conditions impact the recovery of forests, and then an opportunity for students to make a prediction about that question. So again, basically initial model here, investigative question, we make a prediction, and then we're ready to test that prediction against some authentic data collected from Dr. Stevens Rumen in part 3, this supporting ongoing changes in thinking. And so here, we really want students to talk about the graphs before they get into writing anything on their student worksheet. We want to display the graphs on slides or have students look at the graphs. There are some discussion prompts in the slide deck to support students in thinking about what they should be talking about. We have a number of teachers that use the what I see, what it means strategy. So annotating the graph with what they notice, what they think it means. Just another way to support students in becoming familiar with the data sets. In this case, we do another brief overview of the study. Again, these are data collected from Dr. Stephen Rumen and her team. From a number of different burn sites across the northern Rocky Mountains. Again, these wildfires occurred over this 30-year period. And at each site, they studied the recovery by observing and measuring the presence and absence of conifer seedlings. And so reinforcing what a conifer tree is and what a seedling is. We've included that in one of the slides earlier, but just making note, it's a really small tree with needles. That's what they're looking at. So after kind of summarizing her study once more, we'll take a look at some data. So in across these sites, they went to these sites, and many of these sites actually had no seedlings growing back after a fire. So before the fire, there were trees. The fire happened. After, no seedlings came back. And so we'll look at some data that show the absence of seedlings here. So included this graphic here. This is what absence of seedlings mean. And this is the percentage of burn sites where no seedlings regrew. So the percentage of all the sites where no seedlings regrew. Got some questions here about what the different colors represent, different time periods. What does it mean when one bar is shorter than another? Just some different ways to talk about it. So when these scientists visited the sites from the 1985 to 1999 burn areas, so these sites where the fires occurred during this time period, about 19% of those sites had no seedlings grow back. So the fires occurred, no seedlings grew back. Again, this is a wet, cool time period. Visiting the burn sites of wildfires that occurred during 2000, 2015. Oh, God. About 32% of those sites had no seedlings grow back after the fire. Right? So this was a warm, dry time period. So already right now we've got cool, wet, fewer sites where no seedlings grew back, warm, dry, more, higher percentage of sites where nothing grew back. So again, data to support this idea that we might have that warmer, drier conditions might make it harder for seedlings to come back. Looking at another measurement that Dr. Stevens-Ruman took, the regrowth of seedlings. So pre-fire, there were lots of trees. Post-fire, the same number or even more conifer trees grew back. So we're going from absence really to presence. Did trees grow back more or less is what this is indicative of. Again, similar questions. What do the colors represent? What does it mean when one bar is taller than another? Similar X, Y axis. This on the Y axis is the percentage of burn sites where seedlings did regrow. And so again, 85 to 99, the burn sites in that 85 to 1999 period. Almost 70% of those sites, seedlings regrew. So a high percentage of the sites we saw the same number or more seedlings grow back. 2000 to 2015, what do we've got? Maybe 45% of those sites, seedlings grew back. So a much lower percentage where we're seeing the same number or more seedlings growing back. So if we think about the previous graph, during that warm, dry period, we had more sites where no trees grew back. And as we may predict or expect, during that warm, dry period, we had a lower percentage of sites where seedlings regrew. So again, needing to highlight the climate conditions in the context of these graphs and why that's important. Putting it all together here. So this is that if you were facilitating this, you may use those slides to have discussions with students about the different data sets and what they're showing before sending them loose to look at these data sets on their own and answer some analysis questions. Again, the data are designed to support students in evaluating their prediction for the question. How do climate conditions impact the recovery of forests after a wildfire? So students are analyzing these data sets, but in the context of this question, and asked to reflect on whether the data support or refute the prediction they made earlier. And after that, we've done the opening scenario, we've engaged with that puzzle plot text, we've analyzed some data, we've reflected on how those data fit into our initial prediction. And then it's time to construct an evidence-based explanation for that investigative question: how do climate conditions impact the ability of forests to recover after a fire? So students are finalizing new science ideas as they relate to this question by constructing an explanatory model, and it may be up to you in your classroom, if you've had students construct annotated sketches models before, you might need less scaffolding than a classroom that hasn't engaged with that practice before. And so in the slide deck, there are opportunities to show a model and facilitate a discussion about a model, an example model, to talk about different signs and symbols, modeling conventions. Students can work in pairs or individually to construct this final model. I wouldn't do groups of 3. That hasn't worked for me in the past when I was in the 8th grade classroom. Asking students to think about the evidence that we've gathered through an interactive reading. What should a model look like? What should be in it? And so we asked students to look at an example together. And again, this would be scaffolding you might use if your students haven't constructed a model before. So what is a model in science? In the context of this work, it's an annotated sketch we're using to visualize an explanation. It includes different parts or components, different signs and symbols that connect these different components, and it can include evidence. It can include evidence in the form of numbers or ideas from the text to support the concepts being displayed. And so this is an example model that I drew years ago. In a context of a Marvel movie, the Black Panther, that I think students may be familiar with. I remember my students loving Marvel movies. And so what you can see, just giving students an idea of like, all right, here's a key. Oh yeah, vibranium is an element that's represented by this symbol here. And okay, it looks like a meteor fell here, crashed here, in an African region called Wakanda, deposited this vibranium. It looks like it's used in a lot of different ways. So just an opportunity for students to kind of visualize and talk about these different components of a model in a context they might be familiar with, allowing them to see what a model could look like and should look like before they're asked to do that. We include this signs and symbols slide as well. Some classrooms have printed this out and put it on desks so students can see like, oh, these are some of the tools that are available for me to show my thinking in a graphical way. Arrows to show movements, keys, zoom in windows to show what's happening on small scales. So again, up to you. Like, you could remove these slides if you think your class is ready for this, doesn't need it. You could talk about them. You could print some of them out. Again, up to you, the facilitator. And then after kind of introducing models, we practice seeing some, talking about the different components, signs and symbols, asking students to draw their own model for this investigative question: how do climate conditions impact the recovery of forests? So using trees, moisture, this isn't the right key. It actually looks like this. Here's some examples from the answer key. So the key has the same components that were included in that initial model: temperature, water, grasses. And so this is what I might expect post-fire recovery during these cool, wet years. So thermometer less filled, more drops. Evidence from the data. We've got this climax community returning. perhaps during this warm, dry years, we've got warm temperatures, little moisture represented here, seedlings absence in 32% of the site. So just demonstrating this succession pattern can look very different depending on what the climate conditions are like. Another example could look like this. Again, representing the climate conditions with more or less raindrops, differences in the thermometer, showing changes in succession over time. After a fire, we've got our pioneer species, intermediate species coming back, shrubs, flowers, grasses, and then seedlings returning in 70% of sites. Whereas over here, warm or drier, seedlings only growing back in 46% of sites. So the reasons I like these types of assessments or it's kind of like a summative assessment. It's just you get to see student thinking represented in different ways. They often look different. And it's kind of fun to see what students come up with and what they've learned and how they represent those new understandings. So again, a couple of different examples of what they could look like. All data puzzles end with a digging deeper question. So asking students to think about what they've just learned in a different context or in the context of a social justice issue or like a mitigation strategy. In this context, the data represented only go up through 2015, but since 2015, conditions have gotten even warmer and drier, and it's a trend that climate scientists predict will continue. And so given this warming, drying trend, asking students to project into the future, how might these conditions, based on what you've just learned, impact post-fire recovery in the future? So again, here I might expect well, what we've learned, warm, dry conditions makes it harder for seedlings to regrow. And if conditions are amplified, get even warmer and drier, make it even harder for seedlings to come back. So this can give rise to discussion about, well, like what happens to these forests or what are people doing about it? And so this last slide here links to a video that forest managers and an organization, the National Forest Foundation, a restoration project out of Montana, where they went up and were planting different trees to help with that reforestation, that recovery effort. But maybe they did some things in the video that you can talk about, like, did they plant the same trees in that burned area, or did they plant maybe more drought or fire tolerant trees? Did they plant seeds or seedlings? Like, which has a better chance of regrowing and staying alive in the environment? So some different things for students to consider and for you to discuss with students with the video here. So again, kind of like an action. Here's what people have done to make sure these forests do come back. Couple more data puzzles coming up, webinars coming up. We take next week off. Valentine's Day. Maybe that's a thing for you, maybe it's not. But given the dwindling numbers, I didn't want to risk it. So we'll move the next one to the 21st, same time, same place. And then another one, the 28th, looking at wind patterns in the Front Range of Colorado and how they may have changed or maybe aren't changing in changing climate conditions. These webinars will look pretty similar to this instructional framework in the context of a different resource. That's it, team. My email is on that landing page. And believe it or not, my favorite part of my job is not writing curriculum by myself. It's working with other folks. So please email me questions, comments, concerns, whatever. I'm happy to meet with you one-on-one or your school or whoever to talk more about this resource or other resources. Mike, I see you. Before I get you, I'm going to add a link to the chat. It's a link to the certificate page Google form if you want a certificate for an hour PD for being here from the University of Colorado Boulder. Just put your name, email in there, and I'll make sure you get that tomorrow. Yeah, Mike, what's going on?
So, John, great presentation as usual. Is the data for the visualizations you showed, is the data somewhere in the teacher's guide?
The
I
it's if it's not, I'll put that paper in.
so you're taking it from the scientific paper.
I'm taking it from the paper. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah,
No, that's great. No, I was thinking if we wanted to encourage them to build out those visualizations, right? That's all I
Oh,
was.
yeah, to make those bar graphs themselves.
Right. Well, I was trying to figure out, and I love the way you assessed at the end. I was trying to figure out how they knew it was 19% and 46%. So
Oh,
maybe
yeah, okay. Yeah. Including a data table. See, that's why it says draft on the teacher guide, Mike. That's the kind of
that's not what I was
thing that
asking.
we need.
I-
But yeah, having the data so that they could, write those numbers in on the bar graphs, I think would be really helpful for students. Yeah, and I think it's in, let me look. I think it's under additional resources, but on the teacher guide, but I'll add it in the materials. I want to add the link to the paper. I think the paper is one of the more accessible science papers. And so it's just nice to have that background info available. But yeah, thanks, Mike. Any other questions for me here? Cool. I mean, I don't like this story, but I think it's a compelling story and a different way to teach something that can be kind of like womp womp womp. It doesn't really reflect the dynamic nature of succession. And so I think this is a real life way to bring that in. And as fires continue to burn more and more of the landscape, something that we're gonna have to face. Again, this is part of a different unit called the Future of Forests. So if you're looking, if this is something in your curriculum, thinking about wildfire and climate, and you want to spend more time in this space, this unit would be a good fit for you. I think one of the differences between data puzzles in this unit, a lot of times in units, I'm laying breadcrumbs out, right? Like each lesson is designed to give students a piece of evidence that they can use in their final model. And so the lessons build sequentially. There's more inquiry involved. Whereas in data puzzles, I kind of give away the breadcrumbs in that text. So there isn't the same discovery that you would find in the unit, but you can do it faster. So there's the trade-off there. So the Future of Forest unit is about 3 weeks, whereas this could potentially be a couple of days. So same data, same concepts, just a little bit more delving in a little bit more deeply and a little bit more student-led, rather like here it is in a text. It's the data puzzle. Oh yeah, Renee, you got some Yellowstone photos. There's a lot of Yellowstone photos. I appreciate it. I can see you got one right behind you, Grand Prismatic.
Yeah, actually, I did take that photo too.
Yeah.
But yeah, when I was at Yellowstone, I was taking photos of some of the succession.
Yeah.
So I could probably input some of those into the presentation. But
Totally.
like I said, if you wanted me to send you some, I could do that.
I appreciate it.
I have a beautiful photo that looks just like that I think came from the photographer hanging in
Which
my
one?
office.
Me?
You gave me that one.
I did? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Jabat and I go back a
I-
few years.
Yes, right. Like kindergarten or something.
Awesome. No, don't go there, Mike.
Monica, I've been hitting a New York State listserv earth science listserv with these offerings. And so I've been able to bring in these two here, Renee and Mike, through that listserv. So that's the buddy that they have that we're kind of like not quite in yet, but whatever.
Mike has
Well, it was
hosted the New York
nice.
Earth Science teachers at Fredonia for a conference, so he's a good boy.
Thanks. Thanks.
Well, you know what? I'm still recording, so I hope somebody makes it to the end of this recording. I'm not gonna hold my breath, but I hope someone is fortunate to make it to this point. Anybody else? Anybody else got any questions or feedback?
That was great.
These are great. I love them.
Awesome.
Keep 'em
Gabrielle,
coming.
how are you doing? Your first
I really enjoyed it. I teach at the college level, so like the ideas are really good. And I just, if there was a way, like if this one or a different one to have the actual data, like a
Yep.
spreadsheet,
uh-huh.
because my students are at the level where they could make a graph or do a t-test, and sort of that would be a value added for them. So I don't know if the scientists are willing to share data sets like that, but that would be really great for me. Though I did get a lot of good ideas out of this, and it just seems like you have a lot of cool resources that I could modify.
Yeah, in the future of this, you want to make the data available and will make the data available. And in this case, it's a pretty small data set, but we have some significantly larger data sets that we've included in these resources, but we'll make them available for graphing, and are working with some folks that have knowledge of CODAP and from the Concord Consortium. So giving students an opportunity to explore these data sets by pulling the data in and moving them around. So that would be something that would probably be good for a college or high school level, like where you're at. But that's the future of this. Is we've got these polished products, but then we've also got these data sets that tell compelling stories, but maybe aren't in this polished form, that take like a long time to make. So you can work with them, use these ambitious science teaching and instructional practices. Here's the data set, here's some context, and then you can kind of go with it how you want. So that's what we're working on now, in addition to building out the library of these polished resources. Polished with lots of errors I'm going to go fix right now. Yeah, cool. Thanks, Gabrielle. Reach out in the future if you have questions or needs like what you just brought up. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I probably will email you just to see what some possibilities are. I mean, I do have some of my own data and know, but this is good, like diversify what I do and find new sources of data. And even, just as a small in-class activity, if they have a graph and they have to look at what the patterns are and it's already graphed, that's also can be a short but really good exercise. So yeah, thank you.
These are similar questions to what, I don't know if you're working with pre-service teachers, but I know Mike here does that as well. And he was asking similar types of questions. And, I think these are ideas. I remember when I was in school working with folks like yourself, learning like these ideas and how to put them together. And I think like, here's an example of how you could use these ambitious science teaching practices. Like, that's kind of one way I could imagine using this product. Cool. Thanks. All right, team. Have a good night.
Thank you. Take care.
See you later.
Bye-bye.
Thanks again.
Thanks, Renee.
See you next time. See ya.
Bye-bye.
Bye.